That's what makes it efficient. And this is something that I have talked about for the last probably 7 years on a regular basis, and I have changed my mind so many times about what actually is efficient conditioning, if we even need conditioning. I've been on one extreme where we really need to condition actually a lot and have a really huge aerobic base before we even start playing. Not just long distance runs, but also repeated sprintability, actually doing speed work, combined with conditioning, small-sided games to improve speed work, but having conditioning thoroughly built in. And then on the complete other side, letting the conditioning just take place in team training and match play and letting that be enough, and then trying to compensate with just speed, or working on just things that we can do to improve aerobic capacity in the weight room with no classical conditioning work at all. And now after being in the game for 12 years, I started working in strength and conditioning when I was 16. I'm somewhere in the middle, and I have accepted that conditioning is not just a dichotomy of yes or no. It's not just two options. There has to be a middle, and there has to be a range that moves with you throughout the season and according to position. Because let's not forget that the goalkeepers having to run conditioning workouts is fucking crazy. We'll get to that. Let's talk about actual efficient conditioning for soccer. First, we got to look at the demands of the sport. We're playing over 90 minutes, potentially also 120 when we're talking about U19 and up. What do we actually need in order to still be fast by the 90-minute mark? Because what I hear the most from coaches or players is, I'm tired and I'm not fast anymore around 80 minutes. What's missing there? Is it really conditioning? Is it that speed is actually lacking? Because when you say your team is slow, that doesn't have anything to do with condition. Yeah, they might also be tired, but if they're slow, that has to do with speed. What does that got to do with conditioning? How do I make sure that an athlete is still fast and fit and relatively fresh, even if they have heavy legs, around the 80-minute mark? So when we're talking about conditioning, we're talking about aerobic work. When we're talking about speed, we're talking about anaerobic work. And yes, of course, when we're playing in a soccer match, we're going to be in an aerobic energy system. But we're still having short bursts of extremely high effort runs from which we have to recover from very, very fast. So speed and conditioning kind of work together. They're not opposites. We can't train them really together when we start. We need to train both of them separately, and then they combine to help us stay fast and efficient. A basis of conditioning in zones 2 and 3, which are the very low aerobic foundation. In those zones 2 and 3, we tend to do long distance runs. So we might have some tempos in there where we're doing like 70%, but that's really the top of zone 3 going into zone 4, right? We got the 5 zones. Now, this is when the long, slow running, the 5K, the 2-miler, you're sitting there, you're on the bike, you're pedaling, recognize that your heart rate is elevated, certainly, and you know that you're working, but you're not putting in a high intensity work at all. We need that to build our hearts. We need that for our lungs. We need that for our bodies to be efficient, carrying energy and carrying oxygen through our system. So we absolutely need zone 2 and zone 3 work as the foundation. Then also under conditioning, we have RSA, repeated sprintability. Why is this not under speed? It's a lot more under conditioning for me than it is speed. Even though it's called repeated sprintability, we're not actually sprinting. We're sprinting at the maximal capacity that we have for each repetition, but that is not going to be 100% of our fastest sprint ever like we're working towards with actual speed work. There we're working on getting faster. Here we're working on recovering faster. So repeated sprintability is I put as much effort as I can into a run, whether it's 30 meters, 7 seconds, high intensity run, and then I have a short break, whether that's 30 seconds, whether that's 20 seconds, whether it's 15 seconds, and then I turn around and do it again. Repeated sprintability is not just about the speed, it's about the recovery. With those zone 2 and 3 training, we can gradually hold that intensity, that very low intensity over a long period of time, but repeated sprintability is what matters in football, because we are constantly doing those runs with very little time to recover and then still expected to go sprint again. If you're in a very fast-paced match, you're going to recognize that this happens a lot. So we replicate this in training, adjusting either the work time or the rest time so that the work to rest ratio is maybe 1-2. So you're working for 30 seconds and then resting for 1 minute. That would be more speed work. And then we're either starting to pull back the recovery so that we learn to recover faster and more efficiently, or we're bumping up the amount of work so that we're actually adding fatigue into the mix and forcing ourselves to recover faster. Now, if I had to hang my hat on one of these conditioning methods, it would be RSA. I used to be totally against long, slow distance work. American soccer is much more focused on speed work and strength and conditioning than they are on conditioning. Europe tends to be more conditioning friendly than we were. And so I kind of swung in the opposite direction and said, I'm never conditioning my players. They get all of that in training, whatever. Truth of the matter is, if you don't have a good grasp of your aerobic conditioning, so those zones 2 and 3, everything's going to be harder for you. If you're not aerobically fit, everything hurts. You're going to feel pain faster. You're going to feel fatigue faster. Literally everything's just going to be harder. We are getting those zones 2 and 3 in training to some extent. However, you might need a little bit more of that. Depending on where your specific fitness is or the average in team, what their aerobic fitness is, you might need to add a little bit more on top of that. We need a baseline aerobic condition. Otherwise, everything is harder, and we are extremely sensitive then to any kind of pain or fatigue coming in because we just don't have the baseline for it. Where I'm putting the most of my focus is in repeated sprintability. Whether this is something we're actually running in training specifically for, hey guys, now we're going to do RSA work, line up on the line and let's do it all together timed, so actually running it, or we're doing small-sided games. So there's a lot of papers at this point that link improved repeated sprintability to training small-sided games, especially like starting with 5 3-minute small-sided games and then gradually increasing how many small-sided games a player has over a period of weeks. We actually see repeated sprintability improve over those weeks. So it is totally possible to build it into training as well. These need to be tracked with heart rate, in best case scenario during as well, because we want to make sure that we're actually accurate with our heart rates and not just hanging out in zone 1 in the recovery zone, chilling out, but also not in zone 5 actually really intense when we need to be in zone 3 doing tempo runs. Quick conclusion, we need that foundation, but we also need the ability to repeat these high effort runs and recover in the meantime. That's conditioning. What's not conditioning is speed work. And if you know that your team has a problem, at the 80-minute mark, you're wiped out. It's probably because you're not fast. So you need to be implementing speed work regularly. Because here we're working anaerobically, we need a lot more rest, and we're expressing a ton of effort, a ton of intensity, a ton of power. Of course, there's times when we're going to sub-maximal sprint, and that still works in our favor, but we're never going to be sprinting in a zone 2. It's simply not possible. Sprinting is so aggressive, speed work is so aggressive, it's going to spike your heart rate immediately and get you into the higher zones. So it does not count as conditioning, but we definitely still need it. So again, if your team tends to be slacking off and not able to keep up pace in games, being able to play over the other team's tempo and just getting wiped out by the 80, it's probably more speed and then adding RSA on top of it than it is needing to do longer conditioning sessions. Conditioning will never ever make you faster, ever. Speed, however, is way higher value because it will make you faster. So that's what we prioritize, especially in the preseason and in season. However, again, we still want to keep that foundation, otherwise everything will be harder. Let's talk considerations. The first one I'd like to point out is position specific, because a goalkeeper running a 5K for time is just, why? Please stop making your goalkeepers do long runs. That's fucking crazy. They're running maximally 30 meters, most likely. Why do they need to do long runs? It's absolutely unspecific, not helping them actually get better. Of course, everybody needs an aerobic baseline. It's clear, but they just don't need to be doing long runs. However, the midfielders are most likely covering the most distance and pretty much always in some sort of motion. They're going to get a lot less recovery than other field players who are doing predominantly just sprints and then getting a little bit more time to recover, where repeated sprintability might have to look different for midfielders. They might be the ones primarily doing that and also need a higher aerobic baseline than the other ones. Depends on how much distance that they're regularly covering, how much distance they want/need to cover. Next consideration is to protect the legs. Can't tell you how many times in the preseason and the in-season I've been told to have my players go out and run. If they're doing so many sessions a week, I want to keep them from as many wear and tear injuries as possible, so we're going to look at ways to maybe get them off their legs and still get the same effect. So can we get in the gym and put them on the rower? Can we put them on the bike? Can we mimic any of that with circle training, like circuit stuff in the gym, maybe doing med balls, kettlebells, some barbell work to still get that same effect? So maybe it's difficult with repeated sprintability. There you actually need like a cardio device like a rower to get that work in. As far as the zone 2 and zone 3, you can do that pretty well in the gym with other equipment. If it's possible for me to put that on the upper body instead of just the lower body, because we're talking about heart and lungs getting conditioned right now, and the lower body is most likely conditioned enough, I would definitely prefer to do that than send them out to do another run on their legs when their legs actually need recovery. I want their legs to be fresh. Next thing we're looking at is what's already been taken care of in training. So remember that everything happens in a context. A player is in a context of themselves, their lives, how many sessions they have a week, their match calendar, their schedule, the demands of their team and sport, and of their opponents as well. And so we're also looking at how many sessions a week they're doing in total, where they're getting that in team training. Are they playing a lot of SSGs? Are they getting in a ton of distance stuff in training? Is their heart rate in zone 1? So they're just kind of chilling twice a week. And then once they have a really high intensity session, so they're never really getting something in the middle. So if you have GPS data, this would be the time to look at like distance covered, top speed, amount of sprints being run, amount of accelerations, taking that conglomerate, looking at heart rate stuff as well, combining those metrics and getting an idea of, are we even conditioned enough? Are we getting enough in zones 2 and 3? Is RSA just totally spiking us out and we're not recovering at all? What do we need to do? So take all of the data that you can possibly get and consider what's being done in team training, because that might save you some time if you don't have to send the guys out to go run, if you don't have to put your girls in the gym to get them fit and conditioned twice a week. If they're getting that done in training and matches, then you don't need to do more. More is not better. If you're serious about tracking this, you need a heart rate monitor. You just do. I have a Whoop. You can get a Garmin. You can get a Polar. You can get an Aura. I don't care. But if you're serious about this, you need to be wearing a heart rate monitor pretty much at all times, because you need a baseline for your resting heart rate. We need to know what your max heart rate is. And then we want to know, obviously, when you're working out, what zones you're in and how quickly you're recovering, because you will see it spike and that heart rate drop. That's a good thing. But we also need to know if you're actually in zone 2 or are you in zone like 4.5? But that feels good. So we're going to rather do that instead of zone 2. We want to actually make sure we're getting what we want to get. That's what makes it efficient. But again, you're not really able to do this without a baseline. So you pretty much need to be wearing it at all times if possible. And here you're going to see this heart rate chart. That's my data. You're going to need your max heart rate and your resting heart rate. You can use the equation for your max heart rate. If you don't have it, it's 220 minus your age. So for me, this is 192, which you can see by zone 5, the maximum. And then my resting heart rate, you can either use 60, so 1 beat per second, or your actual resting heart rate if you have a baseline. I just use 60. Now you can actually see where you are and where you need to be. This is important. Keep this data. When you're doing the same run or the same work with the same intensity for the same duration, and then you notice you're able to recover faster or your heart rate is actually lower, that means you're actually fitter than you were before. And that's significant. That's how we can figure out if you're actually getting better or not, if you're becoming more efficient or not. And last but not least, don't forget that conditioning is actually pretty quick to change, adjust, improve. Unlike speed and unlike strength and other fitness qualities, it doesn't take that long to get to. Maximally 7 weeks. At the maximum, you're going to see a difference. But for the most part, over 2 weeks, you could already see a difference. It's a lot faster to improve your condition than other fitness qualities, so keep that in mind. You don't need to start 8 weeks in advance making massive improvements to conditioning. You can still make huge improvements over a shorter period of time, especially once training sessions start to take place, once you get into the preseason and the team is training together again. Thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful. Let's talk in the comments if you got any questions, feedback, further ideas, things that have worked well for you, your experiences with conditioning. Let's chat about it.